Welcome back to our coffee talks. Today we have here with us Emma Giordano. Emma is a booktuber. Check out her channel at Emma Books with 3 M's. And, and she's currently finishing her master's degree to become a mental health counselor. Today we will be talking a little bit about two worlds that are constant in her life, which are books and psychology, two things that I love myself. First of all, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to
it. Thank you. So first, I would like to talk a little bit about the evolution of technology. So the evolution of technology brought us all a new way of communication, and people got more comfortable with sharing aspects of their personal lives online. So even if they try to portray a perfect life online, you end up knowing a lot of real information through their social media accounts. And you've been a booktuber for 6 years now, and you're also studying psychology. So I'd really like to know, how do you feel that sharing that part of your life on social media and also on your YouTube account has had an impact on your clinical practice from what you've learned in your internship experience? Or how do you feel it will impact in the future?
it. That's a really great question. And it's interesting because this is something that didn't really occur to me all that much. And I didn't think about until like a subscriber had also asked me, like, how do you feel about like being a counselor and like potential future clients, like seeing your life online? And I was like, oh, like I hadn't thought about that, but it's really important too. And so I am generally like a really open person, online and offline. Like I really am like mostly an open book to the people I interact with. And that's definitely increased online as I'm in like control of posting my day and my feelings. And also with the following I have, like I get a lot of encouragement from being so open. I get messages all the time about how like posting about having a difficult day like makes it people feel normal when they have their days. So there's been a lot of benefits to it, but it does become a little sticky when you think about the boundaries that you have as a practitioner, as a counselor in my case, and a client or a patient. And it's also very new as you're focusing with the technology. Like this isn't something that we've had to deal with for the past however many years until recently. So as of where I am in my studies and my internship experience and whatnot, I haven't yet encountered any issues of like having a client that like knows I have a YouTube channel going into it, or like maybe discovers it after we start working together. But I definitely foresee it being a point in the future. And so I'd like to think that, especially as a more experienced counselor, like that's something we would be able to talk about. But as a novice counselor, as someone who's like really only just like starting their experience of working with clients, I think as of now, I would definitely encourage keeping that boundary and maybe like referring someone who might be a longtime fan of my channel to someone else, because like they might be following me for years and know so much about me. And especially on like platforms like Instagram where like I'm posting like all throughout my day, like that's a lot of information to give like someone that they wouldn't normally get. So especially because I'm so new as a counselor, my goal is to really like eliminate extra barriers as opposed to increase them. So it hasn't been as much of a problem yet for me, and something that I think that as I get more involved in my work as a counselor and like it becomes more of like my full-time thing, then like I might have some other things to adjust with that. Something interesting I had thought about potentially is like when I am my own counselor, because I eventually want to go into private practice and like be in totally control of like my practice and my clients and whatnot. I feel like I would be mostly comfortable with followers like following my YouTube channel, especially if like they didn't come in as like a big fan of mine. Like that's something that I think would be very different from someone who I've already established that therapeutic relationship with, and then they're like, oh, I looked you up online and found out you have a YouTube channel. Like those are two different things. So that's something that I thought about as well. Like I would be more comfortable with that after the fact, as opposed to somebody that like is coming in and wants to see me as a counselor because they love my videos, or because like I've already made this big impact on them, because that definitely complicates things and the work that you can do in that relationship.
Yeah, and I was thinking about what you were saying right now, and like even though people try to portray a perfect life online, what we've been realizing in this last few years is that people actually want you to show your honest self, show that you have good days and you have bad days. And that is great because they understand that you're a person too, you're real, you have real issues like everybody else, and that's really good. But then when you become like a real counselor and you start doing your own practice, those questions come to our minds as counselors, like what are we going to do with this? Like, can we have a client that knows a lot about us or not? How is that going to influence on the therapeutic process?
Yeah,
um,
it's not like illegal or anything. And I feel I remember one of my professors saying that if you have like a public account, like your clients can follow you, you're just not allowed to follow them. So like that crossover is
yeah,
not illegal. It's just that when you get in terms of like the ethics of the situation and how that dual relationship can influence the therapeutic process, that's something that's going to change from counselor to counselor. So there really is no standard, especially because like this factor is so new in this field.
yeah, and that's exactly why I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think about a client knowing a lot of information about his therapist? Do you think it's something that should happen, or you think it's something that shouldn't happen at all? Because as you said, it's not exactly something illegal. It kind of depends of the therapist. So what do you think?
I'm reading a book for school right now that's called The Gift of Therapy by Dr. Irvin Yalom. It's really good, especially for people going into helping professions. I really recommend it. And Yalom is like super open with his clients. He does a lot of self-disclosure, and that's something I identify with. Like I really first see myself, especially as a more experienced counselor, like being willing to bring in more parts of my life to the field and into the therapeutic space, whereas other people are like, no, like there's like a wall between us and that's where I want to stay. But ultimately it really depends on like the comfort level and what the clients want from you. That's what it comes back to in like that openness. It's like some clients will really benefit from hearing like if you have personal experiences with that mental health condition or like grief or loss, they'll really benefit from seeing that human side of you, whereas other clients want you to be this like something they explored in the book was like a sort of like Wizard of Oz type
Yeah.
situation, like the wizard behind the whole like extravagant thing. So they want that separation. So it ultimately comes back to what the client wants from you. But I really foresee myself as being a counselor in the future who would be open to exploring like my experiences and my past and how I'm relating to them, because that was what was really helpful for me in my counseling field. I appreciate when like my therapist talk to me and can be like, I've been there, like I really understand what you're talking about. So I find that a particular strength of mine and the overall experience of being in therapy.
So it's like you appreciate self-disclosure and it's something that you want to integrate in your work, but you will always see the patient, see the client, and understand if that's something that works with them or if it's something that they wouldn't like to happen.
Yes, especially as someone who is only an intern as of now, they really encourage us to like be very careful with self-disclosure, because it's very easy to like feel like you want to tell them because like that's what would help you, but
Yeah.
it's really not what the client needs. So especially where I am in my studies, we're told to be very cautious of self-disclosure, not discouraging, but it's mostly meant to be used as like a way of forming rapport, as opposed to like I think it becomes a lot easier when you're a more experienced counselor and you've learned like the difference between disclosing for yourself and disclosing for the client, but that's really what it should always come back to.
Yeah. Okay. So now I wanted to think of this question from other perspective because you're an influencer. So how do you feel you impact people on their opinions about the importance of mental health and the importance of the role of a psychologist? Because I feel like now more people talk about psychology online, but that wasn't something that happened like a few years ago. So how do you feel you impact your followers?
Yeah, I can say with great confidence that people have been really impacted with my honesty about my own experiences with mental illness and difficulties with mental health, as well as my studies in psychology. I get like tons of messages all the time about how much people appreciate me, like I said, sharing those difficult days, or being open about the obstacles that I've experienced. And you know, it's a big part of like my counselor identity, and like my personal identity is all about like allowing people to feel that they're not alone, and really encouraging discussion and awareness on these topics. And I get a lot of really wonderful feedback about how like me talking about it, or like showing me going to therapy myself in a vlog, is what encourages people to seek out counseling or help for the first time themselves. Or like I'll be doing like an Instagram like live Q&A, and you can ask whatever questions you want, and a lot of people are like, I'm going to counseling for the first time because of you, like what tips do you have for me? So I'm very aware that my openness with my own experiences and like my studies in psychology and mental health, like people have also told me that they are like, the reason they're pursuing psychology is because of me, like, and they resonated with me talking about why I love it so much and why that's the thing that I want to study. So I'm definitely very aware of it, and I try and keep that in mind when talking about it, because although like I'm willing to share those difficult days, or to share the difficult experiences that I've had, it's really important to me to not just like say that those are things that are going on, but to also like encourage people like to reach out when they need help, to take agency in their own lives and make changes for themselves. So it always ties back to that view of wanting people to improve their own lives by me talking about it.
And it's really related again to your self-disclosure, you wanting to self-disclosure with your clients and the people around you, so that they know that you go through difficult times and all those difficult situations in life. And
Definitely.
also,
I was just gonna say that really started for me as a teenager, because I started doing presentations about like mental health awareness and whatnot, and my own experiences in my high school when I was a student there. So I was like standing up in front of people that go to school with me and talking about things like my eating disorder and depression. So I've really always been like super open about it, and that's carried me through my experiences as a YouTuber, and then throughout my experience as a counselor. It's something that started very young for me, and I've been able to make a lot of connections with people because of it. So that's why it informs my counseling process as well.
yes, and you were saying that you feel that it influenced you in the way that people started to follow more psychology in a career path. But I also feel like sometimes I watch your Instagram lives, and I feel like your openness about everything about psychology makes people feel okay with asking questions, psychology questions like how do you schedule an appointment, why should you go to a session of psychology, and all of those things. It's really interesting to see.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, because also like it's not, you know, learning about like mental health or psychology, like it doesn't just benefit people like me who go into those fields and or study them academically. Like these are things that are beneficial to everyone, regardless of who you are, what experiences you've had in life, what your career is. It only benefits you to learn more about yourself and about other people, because you're constantly interacting with other people.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
a goal of mine, that like, you know, even if like studying psychology isn't your thing or what you want to do, it's still going to benefit you to learn a bit about the importance of maintaining good mental well-being or seeking counseling, even if you don't have a serious mental illness and you might just be, oh, sorry, my Siri went off.
No
um,
problem.
yeah, so it benefits everyone. And that's what I hope to do is regardless of your walk of life, to encourage you to learn more about yourself and about others and how we can improve those interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships.
Yes, to like show your followers that mental health is important. It's not just about physical health. It's mental health is the thing that we should talk about and we should worry about.
Absolutely.
So now I wanted to talk a little bit about books. That's another world in your life.
Always.
We can see in your screen. So do you think that nowadays the topic of mental health is more present in the book industry, like compared to a few years ago?
Yeah, I fully believe that. YA is definitely where my comfort zone. That's where I read a lot, is the young adult books and books for teens. But I've definitely seen a big change in how like the books published about mental health issues in the early 2000s versus what's coming out in the late 2010s and now 2020. A lot of the earlier books, I feel, were really focused on like showcasing like what it is to be like in the depths of that illness and the darkness of it, which are obviously really important and necessary stories. But increasingly, I find a lot of books that incorporate mental health not as a theme of the book, but just as an aspect of the character, the way that it really is in all of our lives. So, I'll be reading like a thriller book and the main character has depression or anxiety, or a fantasy book. And the main character is dealing with something of that as well. So I think that there's been a real expansion and variety in the types of stories that are being told, and especially in terms of the intersectionality of mental health and other identities like race or gender. Typically throughout media, not just in books, like mental illnesses have always sort of focused in on the stories of like white middle class folk, and mental health impacts everyone regardless of race, gender, age. So it's been really wonderful to see the development of that, and how exploring like the very real differences that occur when those different identities intersect. So I think that we've made a lot of great strides in that. And also like, something else I can think of that's changed is like trigger warnings on books were not really normalized back then, and now most of the books that deal with like some of the gritty details of mental health issues like will often offer trigger warnings and resources, and I find that really wonderful because that only helps to protect readers.
Yeah, and people in reading those books and seeing movies or shows that portray those mental illness, they can learn more about it, and they can know that's something that a lot of people go through. So I can search for help and this can get better. So it's a really good thing.
Totally.
So at the top of your head, like, could you recommend us some of your favorite books that talk about mental health?
Absolutely. I have this is my mental health fiction book here. Some of them, they're all around. So one of the ones that I recently read that I just absolutely adored is Heroine by Mindy McGinnis. And this is a young adult novel about a high school softball star who is in like a really bad car accident and becomes addicted to opioids and eventually heroin. And so it was a really wonderful story about how like absolutely anyone can fall into the world of addiction, like regardless of how much you may think you are against drugs or what your past experiences are. Like no one is entirely safe from it, and things can really change in an instant. So I thought that was a really wonderful exploration of it. Another one that comes to mind for me is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. This is a fun one for people who are like big book nerds and involved in the fandom world. As the main character has anxiety, and I believe social anxiety is a focus there. And there's also a character, the love interest in the book has selective mutism, which is another form of an anxiety disorder that is not focused on at all. Like a lot of people don't even know it exists. And I think this is a really great example of those types of books I was talking about, where like the plot of the book isn't necessarily the main character dealing with this mental illness. It's that this character lives with it and that influences what happens in the book. So that's another one that I really love. And let me give you one more, because I just love talking about mental health books so much.
I would love some recommendations, so feel free.
This is an underrated one that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but I absolutely loved. It's called Definitions of Indefinable Things by Whitney Taylor. And it follows two teens who meet online at the pharmacy as they're both getting like their antidepressants refilled. And I love this book because it really explores very different experiences that people have with depression. Like, as I was saying before, like people who deal with mental illness, like they're not a monolith. Like, it looks different on absolutely every person. So I think it was really important how this book shows that like some people develop depression because of like a significant experience in their life, and that then in turn like changes the way that you know their mental health affects them. And other people, like there is no traumatic event, and some people are able to, you know, function really well and while handling it, and other people have a really difficult time. And something else that stands out to me about this book is a common trope in mental health fiction, especially with romance, is that like the relationship is the cure, and like the person is better because they've found someone they love. And it's really harmful because that's not how like these illnesses work. But this book really makes a very explicit you know, message of saying like, it's not you that has helped me. You know, there are ways for people to improve their mental health through the connections that they make, but ultimately it comes from within yourself and what you're willing to do. So this is a really sweet one that warmed my heart, and I also really related to. So those are just a couple of favorites of mine.
So that last one is a very realistic book in terms of two people with depression can have like totally different experiences. And also in terms of having a relationship doesn't mean that you'll improve because of the other person. So that's really interesting as well.
Yeah, the realism is what I really look for in mental health books, is that I want to read about real people who are living with these illnesses, not like personified illnesses who you take the symptoms and then you create the character. I want to see how the character changes based on their mental health experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I also wanted to ask you if there's any book that you read in the past that had an impact over your decision to study psychology.
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't necessarily know if there is like a book that had encouraged me, because my desire to pursue counseling or therapy as a career really came from my own experiences, and you know, having a wonderful therapist who helped me through so much, and realizing that like I was able to help other people too. I was like, maybe this is like what I meant to do. But interestingly enough, this is not at all the field of psychology that I've gone into, but a big part of my decision to study psychology specifically comes from Criminal Minds, because I love Criminal Minds so much. It's one of my all-time favorite shows. And for a long time, like my decision of what I wanted to do was between like doing behavioral analysis, like in the FBI, or working in that forensic aspect, versus helping and doing therapy. So, you know, I would watch Criminal Minds and I would see the way that they would make all these connections between human behavior and human cognition. And I just thought it was so fascinating. So that is something that really encouraged me to actually seek out psychology as something I wanted to study in undergrad, and then learning more about like what careers people have in psychology, and you know, obviously the difference between television and real life. But ultimately I realized that like, while it's fun to like learn about those things and make those connections and whatnot, what I really want to do and what's most fulfilling for me is helping people. And so that's why I went into the field of counseling.
Yeah, it was really funny what you said right now about the show, because sometimes we think that things work as they show us on television, and sometimes it's so different from it, like really different.
Absolutely.
So to finish our interview, the name of these interviews is Coffee Talks, and so our team is very curious to know, if you were a coffee, which one would you be?
Okay, so I have to be honest, and I feel like this is like a little blasphemous for being on a show called Coffee Talks, but I don't drink coffee, and like, I have never had like a full cup of coffee in my life. Um,
Really?
it's like a weird fun fact about me is that I've never actually drank like a full cup of coffee. I've like
But
tasted other people's.
but
Sorry.
I've came prepared because as your follower in Instagram and also on YouTube, I knew that you don't like coffee. But I wanted to ask anyway. But I also have a question to replace this one since you don't like coffee. So if you were a book, which book would you be?
Ooh, that's a really good one. I appreciate your flexibility and attendance to that. If I was a book, what book would I be? Because that's a very different question from like my
Yeah.
favorite books and like my favorite books or the books that I like. I think I have one though. Oh, okay, I have two. Very on par with our discussion. They both have mental health themes. So I would say my younger self, and obviously who I am as my younger self continues into who I am as an adult. This song will save your life by Layla Sales has been a favorite book of mine because I read it as a teen and it resonated so strongly with me. So it follows a young girl who like has never really been able to fit in, and she feels like really isolated from her peers and her family, and so she ends up like stumbling upon like a nightclub one night, and becomes like a DJ. And so it really shows the power of like finding yourself through music, which has also been a really big part of my life, and just encouraging that confidence. So this book, I always say, has been like a piece of my heart to recommend to other people. And something that I feel is a little bit more relevant to me as an adult is Nice Try, Jane Sinner by Leanne Olkey. And this follows a teenager who is dealing with depression. But again, this is one of those stories that like depression is like the side plot. Like the
Okay.
story is actually really funny because it follows a girl who's been expelled from high school, and so she starts taking college credits at a local community college in order to like get her degree and whatnot. And so she ends up being on like a Big Brother type campus show that really blows up online. So it's like she's living in this house with all these strangers and they have challenges and whatnot. And she also is studying psychology. So I thought that this book, I feel, really does reflect me as well, like as someone who studies psychology and counseling. And it's a very introspective book as well. It's one of those novels that's written as like a journal from the main character.
Yeah.
So I feel like those are two good ones as for like what book I would be myself.
Two books then.
But I can never choose. I'm difficult.
That was a really good answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that concludes our interview. Thank you so much for being here with us once again. And I really liked the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I did too. Yeah, books and mental health are like my thing. Those are like the two things in my life that are consume all other parts of it. So they're two of my favorite things to talk about with others as well.
Okay, so bye.
Bye.